When God delivered Israel from the bondage of the Egyptians and took them to the promised land, He not only told them to teach their children in the fear of God and to obey the commands of God, but He also warned them not to return to the ways of Egypt. Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohr, and I'll be joined again in just a few moments by Pastor Isaac Crockett for what is part 2 in our 2-part series on Christian education, which involves a biblical worldview emphasis. Our title is this, and it's taken from Proverbs 22:6, train up your child, leave Egypt behind. God told His people to not consider or worship the gods of the anti-God culture around them, and He told them not to reflect back on Egypt as the place of bondage to which they did not want to return. He said, don't look back to Egypt and go back into bondage. But today, in America, the church has spurned God's warnings to then Egypt, and I think to ourselves, and we have not rejected the gods around us. Instead, remembering Egypt with disdain, I think the church in America has crawled back into Egypt and become ensnared once again in the ugliness of the bondage of all that Egypt was to the Israelites. Combined with specific enemy strategies voiced by communist and atheist leaders like Vladimir Lenin, our children and the curriculum taught to America's children has been usurped and filled with lies upon lies written by people who want to destroy this nation. Government is presented as God. Government, the grantor of rights. Government, the savior of mankind, and that government never lies. In the modern curricula, facts are never as important as value. Education has been reduced to mere training for work, and mediocrity gets a trophy and more. And anytime God gives His people warnings or commands, such as how to train up our children, He does it because of His love for us. For Christian parents who love their children and view them as gifts from God and lives on loan from God to be trained up in His ways, good intentions seem to most always, at least they start out that way, yet the allure of the world system, the fear of making a change or going counter to the flow of the culture or one's peers, or the real or perceived fear of insufficient money perhaps to put our children in Christian schools, or maybe insufficient time as parents to actually teach them in homeschool, many Christian children remain in government schools. And day by day, and then month by month, and then year by year, time slides by until the most impressionable times of instruction in our children's lives are past and the mold is cast. But there are options. And today in this program, we're going to resume our discussion with Jeff Keaton, founder, president, and CEO of Renew a Nation, helping children to develop a biblical worldview. And with that, let me welcome back again to the program Jeff Keaton. Jeff, thanks for being back with us again today.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's a privilege to be back with you and Isaac.
There's not a topic more important in your heart or our hearts as fathers who have homeschooled our children. Isaac and I have. And so I want you to start here. Before we get into talking about Egyptian schools, the public school system, for the sake of the program, I'd like you to take and redefine or define again what is true Christian education, and why is it essential that the goals, the commands of God in Deuteronomy chapter 6, to teach our children to fear God and to obey His commands is absolutely critical if we are ever going to expect God's blessing on our families, our children to be grown up to be responsible adults, all of the things that I think most of us watching want. Why is this so important? Define Christian education.
Well, let me give you my latest working definition of education. So let me just say this. All education is Christian if it's true education, and all education is sacred. The only way you can make education non-sacred is to secularize it by taking God out of it. So here's my definition right now of education. The purpose of education is to lead young men and women to know the one true God, develop their knowledge, talents, skills, and character so they can take dominion of the earth and bend it back towards God's original design. That's my latest working definition of education in general. And so what I like to say, if that's a good definition of education, and I think it is absolutely impossible for a secularized school, a school where God has been removed, it's impossible for a secularized school to actually give a child a good education. They cannot and will not teach them to know the one true God. They can help them to develop some knowledge, but not all knowledge, not true, deep, rich knowledge from God himself. And they have no foundation for morals. They have no absolute foundation to develop character. And so therefore, I say only a Christian school can actually give a true, excellent education.
And we're going to leave it right there, ladies and gentlemen. It's a good foundation. We're going to come back and we're going to be talking next in the next segment. Now, we're going to do a little contrasting between the public government school system, the Egyptian school system that Jeff referred to, and Christian education, so you get a better understanding that this is real. The contrast is real. There is a true difference between a true Christian education and a secular education in our government school system. We'll be back in just a moment.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and today we're on part 2 of Train Up a Child, and we're looking at leaving Egypt behind. Now, Jeff, you've been making it clear from our first segment, our first program to this program, that the goal of educating our children is the discipleship, Christian discipleship. And Christian discipleship ought to be able to start with children. And I think every parent listening, every grandparent, every person listening that loves the Lord, they understand what you're talking about, that we need to be discipling our children. I think where it gets a little confusing for some, something that they haven't even been on their radars, when you say, and this affects their education. And they say, well, where does the education have to do with discipleship? Isn't that church and home? But it all comes together, as you've made it very clear. And I think for me, speaking from somebody who has been licensed and taught as a long-term substitute and substitute teacher in public schools for years, there was a huge difference between the curriculum, even just purely the books, the text, the materials used, versus in my own home where my children, have they use BJU Press and have a biblical worldview integrated into every part of every subject they learn. So I'd love to see a contrast between curriculums that, here's a curriculum that's got biblical worldview versus one that doesn't have that. But then maybe the heart of the question is why for so many parents, even Christian parents, why do they not even have this understanding that about their kids' education being a big part of discipleship? Why isn't that on the radar for maybe some pastors and parents, that it's not even on the radar for them?
Well, let me just start with the curriculum issue. Obviously, by the way, I really do like BJU Press because I think they've done better than anyone in the country at immersing every subject in biblical worldview. And I think that's powerful. But what I would say about secularized curriculum, and obviously all public schools have secularized curriculum, and many Christian schools do, and private schools, is that a secularized curriculum, and we got to go back to the foundation. This curriculum answers all the major questions, gets the wrong answer, I should say, to all the major questions of life. Think about it. They get the wrong answer to the question, who has ultimate authority in this world? They get the wrong answer to the question, where did we come from? They get the wrong answer to the question, all of these questions, what is wrong with this world? Why is there so much evil? Every worldview has to answer that question. They get the wrong answer to the question, how do we fix the brokenness? And what makes us human? Are we different than animals? We're seeing all this environmentalism and radical animal rights stuff because humans don't know who they are. They don't understand they have the image of God stamped upon them. And they get the wrong answer to what is our purpose for being here in this world. Okay? And so when you build an entire curriculum and you have the wrong answer to all the major questions of life, it's impossible to give a child a good education. It's impossible. Now, let me stop here and quickly say, I have many friends who are missionaries in the public schools as far as adults teaching. They're trying their best. If you're watching this, don't take offense to what we're saying. You know what we're saying is true. But I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, just like Isaac has done in public schools. But when we lend our children's minds to public education for this long period of time, it has a huge impact. And why people don't get it, it's cultural. It's cultural Christianity in America. We've just gotten intertwined with our local schools, our football programs, our basketball programs, and literally it's the frog in the kettle. It's gotten worse and worse and worse, and we just literally are sound asleep at the wheel right now in the church.
Jeff, let me ask you just real quickly here. Let's just say that you're talking to a family, and so you've got parents, and they say, well, I went to public school. Grandparents, my parents went to public school. You know, so the parents and the grandparents, they've gone to the public school. So now the kids are in the public school, and they're saying, well, what's the big deal? And you're saying, hey, look, you should not have them in a public school or even a Christian school if the curriculum and the rest of the atmosphere there is not helping train them up in the Word of God. Make your case for it. What would you tell them? Why do they need to take their children out? Because for someone like you said, culturally, it's just part of our culture. That's what we do.
Yeah. So here's what I would say. Number one, it is statistically proven that whoever has the most access to the heart and mind of a child will shape that child's worldview, period. Okay? So when you think about a child going to school for 16,000 hours from kindergarten to 12th grade, they'll only go to church between 1,500 and 3,000 hours. Okay? Then you know that education matters. Secondly, I like to ask parents, where do you want your child to be 20 years from now? The worldview they're developing right now will determine where they are and who they are, more importantly, in 20 years. So why would we risk lending their hearts and minds to people who do not share our biblical values? The statistics are very high. The church has lost 65, 75, 80% of their kids over the last 40, 50 years. Why? Because we gave access to their hearts and minds to people who do not share our biblical values. And the third thing I would say is, listen, moms and dads, this isn't your public school 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Evil teaching is accelerating at a rate I cannot describe to you. And if you don't want your child coming home in 10 years and telling you you are a racist, homophobic, bigoted person, then you better consider getting them out of public education right now.
And Jeff, what you are describing, you've mentioned it, we mention it on this program over and over again. And on our American Pastors Network, our emphasis is the focusing on what the Bible says, a biblical worldview, who God is, what He has done, why we're, the basic answers, the key questions in life, what you're describing. And that is, as you said very clearly, impossible for a curriculum or a educational system. How can they teach a child how to address the issues of life if they don't know who they are and who God is? And I'll just throw in one piece of history right here. Here in Pennsylvania, where we're sitting right now taping this program, William Penn, our founder, and other founders made it very clear. They said that if the citizens of this nation, a free nation, a represented republic, did not know the 10 commandments of God, God's basic moral law, and you referred to it, the basic elements of what we can do and should do, that's right, for order of society. They said if people did not voluntarily submit themselves to those 10 principles, commands, and those in office ultimately did not submit themselves, the republic would die. Tyranny would result. Ladies and gentlemen, it is practical. And when we only have 2 to 3% of the people in this country right now who hold a biblical worldview, who know who God is, Here's the problem. So we're going to come back to you, Jeff. There may be people watching right now who say, well, you know what? We are concerned about our children. We may have some concern about our kids being in public school, but as Christian parents, I don't have the money to put them in Christian school. Or I don't think I can homeschool, even though there are so many hundreds of millions who are. How would you take and answer that now? We're working now into the solution aspect here. All right, we presented a problem. We've got to get them out of that public school because we can't compete. We can't compete with 16,000 hours of secular instruction. So how do you talk to the parent or the pastor, perhaps even right now, who is saying, all right, what do I do? I don't have the money. I have no option. What do you say?
So as I speak across America, I've had more people than I can possibly remember, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas come up to me and weep, tears running down their cheeks saying, Jeff, I did not know what you're talking about when I was raising my child. I gave them a secularized education, kindergarten through college. Today they do not believe. Oh, I would give anything if I could get back those years. Listen to me, moms and dads. You've got to do whatever it takes right now to make sure that your child is developing a biblical worldview. You don't want to hear those words in 15 or 20 years. It will break your heart. You can lose a child's heart, and often they'll come back to the faith. But once you lose a child's mind, it's so much harder to get them back to the faith. So secondly, I would say, so first of all, you got to change your thinking. You got to change your lifestyle. You got to stop going to vacations or whatever it takes to give your child a biblical worldview. Stop saying you can't do it. You can do it, and you got to make it a huge priority. Secondly, if you want to homeschool, at Renew Nation, we have a homeschool coaching team. We can take you all the way through the process. That is probably the least expensive way if you're not already working a full-time job. Many Christian schools will offer you scholarships if you'll walk in and say, I want my child in this school. They'll work with you. Many, many schools will. And then we have an online academy called Illuminate Online Academy. And it's fantastic, live teachers, engaging learning, and we have 75% scholarships for children coming out of Christian public schools right now. So if you're a child in the public school, you'll contact us at Renew Nation. We'll hook you up, and literally, it would only cost you in year one something like $700-800 for the first year, and it's a fantastic education. So there are absolutely options for you, but you got to make your mind up. You're going to do whatever it takes to make it happen.
And Jeff, I'm glad you went there first because I'm going to emphasize it again. Moms and dads, I'm a granddad. I have 6 children and 14 grandchildren. Some are homeschooled and some are in public and Christian school. You've got to decide, first of all, that you're going to do, mom and dad, what God said to do. You've got to give them a Christian education. The other problems, the hurdles that are too big right now, they can be addressed. You take that first step, God will help to work out the other. And Jeff just already explained some that will really help significantly if your children are in a public school right now. And you think financially you can't move them to the Christian school, you contact Illumined or Renew Nation, that will be on the screen. They can help in a substantive way. All right, Jeff, that's for the mom and dads. I want to talk to the pastors right now, because the pulpits of America are supposed to be there instructing their families in the way they should go. Christian education ought to be a part of it. Are there things that pastors can do and should do to also make it more possible for them to take a lead in Christian education right now?
Absolutely. First of all, I would say just create a Christian education-friendly environment in your church. Make sure that the homeschool families, the Christian school families are recognized, are loved, are respected in your church. Secondly, be open to homeschool co-ops. They're all over the country. Let them come in. Use your facilities during the week, okay? Be very friendly to homeschool co-ops. And then if you want to start a school, at Renew Nation, we have a full-blown program to help you launch from A to Z, a brick-and-mortar school. Or we have a new program with our online academy where you can launch a micro school. All you do is provide the facility and a facilitator, or 2 or 3, however many you need. And we provide all the excellent teachers, the curriculum, everything. And it's fully accredited, so your kids will graduate with accredited degrees. Bill Gates is starting micro schools all over the world, schools of 20, 30 in Africa and everywhere else. Why don't we start a bunch of micro-Christian schools so that every church in America, if they want to, feel led to, could have 15, 20, 30, 40 kids in their building developing a biblical worldview through Christian education. We have all the tools to help you do that.
And Jeff, that is fantastic. Thank you for having the vision. And we want to communicate what we're doing right now to folks. So people, if you're listening, Pastor, if you're listening, there is no excuse. There is no excuse not for having your buildings being used for Christian education, encouraging your people. And mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. There are ways, and this is one practical way, but God will undertake all of it when you make the right choice. We'll come back in just a moment for some concluding thoughts now.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and we're finishing up our second part of Train Up a Child. And this is the one called, Leave Egypt Behind. And by that, we're talking about what kind of training, what kind of education are your children or your grandchildren or children in your church getting. And so Jeff Keaton has been with us. He's been walking us through this. And so Jeff, as we conclude, just your final thoughts, your final remarks, somebody watching, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's somebody who knows a parent in the same situation, and it's dawning on them the responsibility of training up a child in the way that God wants that child to go. Biblical discipleship. The Bible makes it clear, Old and New Testament, to pass what we know on to the next generation and the generation after that and after that. Amen. And so the person listening right now that agrees with you but says, oh, I don't know if I could take my kids out, or I've got my friends or my family, I don't know if I can convince them to take their kids out of secular education right now, put them in Christian education. What do you say to them? This is our final shot, to talk to them about pulling the kids out and putting them in a Christian environment for education.
First of all, I will say you will never regret the decision. I've talked to many, many people who pulled them out, and they just, it's an awakening once they see what's happening in Christian education. Secondly, radical ideas have overtaken our educational system right now. You've got to believe me on this one. It's not even debatable. So we have race division. We're getting an unbiblical answer to the question of what is wrong. The whole race issue. We have, our schools are teaching hatred for our country, hatred for our history. The radical sexual agenda is something I can't even describe to you. It's so bad. Socialism is being taught. A huge number of millennials believe that communism is 30-some% think communism was okay. Where did they get that? They didn't get it at home. They got it at school. There are so many radical ideas being taught in our public education system right now. I challenge you to reconsider and to do whatever it takes to get your child out of public education. Public education is literally killing our nation right now, and we must do something drastic, and we must do it now in order to save this generation of young men and women.
Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today and for making that appeal and giving options. And ladies and gentlemen, take this to heart. Again, what can someone do? Jeff said he's never run into someone who said, I am sorry that I had my children experience a true Christian education. Because you won't. But I can take you to so many who've lost their children and their grandchildren because they didn't. And can I ask all of you, are you considering, you say, I've got time, I can make a decision next week or next month. The clock is ticking fast. And the longer you wait with your children, the further away from God they will get. Don't delay. Make the decision to do and teach your children, disciple your children, biblically, a biblical worldview with a true Christian God-centered education. Fear God and obey His commands. That's the whole duty of man. How are you doing? We encourage you this week, right now. Take this program to heart. Share it with your friends and others. Make it a matter of discussion. Mom and Dad, discuss it between yourself. Pastor, discuss it with your deacons. Can you use your church building? Yes, you can. Make that difference. Do what you can now. Well, thanks for watching us today. It's a privilege to be in your home. Contact us, reach out to us, pray for us, partner with us in prayer and finances. God bless you.